So if everyone here the first time, PodPlus weekly, what is it? It's a session, it's a conversation, it's a dive deeper discussion into the topic we talk about on the podcast each week. This week we're going to talk about inner critics. Anyone listen to it this week? You don't have to listen, by the way. You can always just rock up. If anyone did listen, just head into chat, let me know anything particularly that's stuck. Plan for today is we're going to do a little bit of group reflection on critics, and then I'm going to share some of the ideas for action. We'll dive a bit deeper. I've got a few other resources that might be useful for you on the topic. But anyone that listened, let me know what has stuck while I just do the fun technical thing about getting my screen up. Let's do that. Will my screen arrive? There we go. My screen is here. You are here. I can see that Reg is just arriving. Reg is a regular. Oh, it was one of your favorite episodes. Oh, that's interesting, Katie. That's nice. I really like the naming aspect of the inner critic. Yeah, so kind of going to give it a name. I think for anyone that's followed our work for a little while, and maybe you've read Squiggly Career, we talk about confidence gremlins in the Squiggly Career, and I think the inner critic is almost like the voice of one of your gremlins. It's like a sort of a subset of a gremlin, so it might connect some development dots if you've read any of our other work. Kirsty listened this morning, was rather, I mean, Kirsty, try recording the thing, talk about exposing, like sometimes I'm like, should I say this? I'm like, oh, well, hopefully it'll help some other people. But yeah, it was quite exposing. Inner critic is similar. Yeah, Lucy, that doesn't surprise me. Lucy works in the team. What else have we got? Interesting here, different ways that inner critic shows up. Oh, God, I'm glad you like the honesty. I'm glad you like. Well, we only do it for you. We definitely don't do it for ourselves. Oh, brilliant. Good. Okay, this is reinforcing. I'm like, okay, it's worth it. It's worth the exposure. It's worth it. Made me reflective after a good interview, although I didn't get the job. I'm challenging myself not to listen to Inner Critic all week. Oh, brilliant. I'm glad about that. You might like next week's podcast as well, Claire, which is on how you turn hard times into helpful learning. And I think a hard time is like, it's a specific moment in time. It's not like a knotty moment where it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like not getting an interview, not getting a job that you wanted. And the podcast about how to turn hard times into helpful learning, and it could be a good follow-on listen for you. So we are going to talk about how to quieten your inner critic. Can someone give me the link to the podcast? Yes, somebody probably from the Amazing If team can maybe put the link into where it is on amazingif.com, and then you can get it from there. I've also got some other links for you today. So first of all, I thought we might do a little bit of an anonymous assessment. Let me make it anonymous before I say this, on how loud your critic feels right now. So in terms of the volume, podcast was like how to quieten your inner critic. Hence there's a volume dial here. And we're going to stick stars on the screen. If you're like, my critic feels particularly loud right now, maybe you're going to stick a star here. If your critic feels quite quiet, it's not kind of really turned up and talking to you, you might put it low. So can you, everyone who's a regular, stick a star on my screen, whereabouts on this dial is the volume of your critic right now? For everybody that is new and is like, how are they doing this star thing on screens? Do not worry. Head towards the top of your Zoom screen, like take your mouse up there. You should see view options, and then annotate. I will write it for you here. So you have like view options, and then you go to annotate, and then stamp, and then star. And you should release the functionality. And thank Lucy's put it in the chat as well. And anyone who can't see like that stuff, don't worry. You can always just put it into chat privately or publicly, whatever you're more comfortable doing. I cannot see the message I am currently doing as I just arrived. I'm sorry, Rima, I don't know what that relates to. I'm going to add some manual ones that I've got here. Some manual ones. I've got a couple of, okay. So as a group, I would say our volume is turned up, like generally. There's quite obviously there's a chunk of people here who are like it's sort of moderate to low, but the majority of us are more in this kind of space where the volume of our critic feels quite high right now. Elaine says, mine used to be super high, critical of everything, but now perhaps post bug 50th birthday, I am much better. Maybe it's birthday. That is not one of my ideas for action, like have a big birthday, but maybe it could. I was thinking a bug birthday, a big birthday, who knows? Sarah's little boy loves bugs, so I think he'd love a bug birthday. Okay, next thing. I wanted to get a bit of a sense of. Let me remove all of your stars for a second. And this one you might want to share privately with me. It's entirely up to you. But what does your critic say to you on a bad day? Like if the volume's turned up, what is it talking about? So you can put it in chat. If you find Helen in chat, Helen Tupper, you can always let me know what it's saying privately, and then I'll share the kind of what it's saying, but I won't say your name. Or if you're comfortable, you can put it into chat. Interesting. God, these critics are horrible. So you're worthless. Everyone thinks you're an idiot. Well, that's it. You're getting fired now. I'm so lazy. Yeah. Oh God, Paul and I have that one. And I sort of intuitively know I'm not lazy, but then my critic says I'm lazy. Other people are clearer and more succinct than me. I mean, gosh, these critics, horrible, aren't they? You can't do this. You're to blame. Not productive. You're enough in the wrong job. Look how horrible we are to ourselves. You probably know if you're a regular, been doing some meditation, and it said, as is the mind, so is the body, as is the body, so is the mind. So basically like your thoughts become your actions, I guess is probably what we might talk about more. So it's almost like the more you say this stuff, the more it affects actually how you show up. And like we are the people that are saying this stuff to ourselves. It's horrible, isn't it? You don't want what you're talking about, made a fool out of myself again. I mean, honestly, it makes me sad. It's making me sad, but I get it. Like I say some of this stuff to myself too. And you think, gosh, we don't look at all this stuff we're saying to ourselves. Okay, so let's be honest. Critics quite high. It's not very nice. So we might want to do something about this voice, because it really isn't helping us feel good about ourselves. And if we're not, feeling good about ourselves, it's very difficult to be at our best at work when, this is the voice that's going on in our head. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do so this voice gets a little bit quieter. I'm not entirely sure if you can kill it constantly, because some of this stuff is quite deep rooted. We'll get into kind of the inner child stuff in a minute, but we can definitely turn it down a bit. There's some stuff that means that this isn't so distracting. It's where, I don't know if any of you have done like Ethan Cross's book. I read it on Chatter. Sarah spoke to him on the podcast as well. But I do think like there's the difference between this being like a little buzz, like a bee that sometimes buzzes into your mind and then buzzes off, and like a swarm, like an absolute swarm that is distracting when you're in a moment and in a meeting. So I think maybe if this can be like a little bee that kind of buzzes in and then buzzes off, that's the worst picture of a bee you're ever going to see. But, if it can be a little bee, then maybe we can cope with it. If it's a blimmin' swarm, then it's not helpful. So we are going to talk about a four-part process, which is going to hopefully help us go from swarm to a single bee. First of all, we're going to talk about distance. Don't worry too much about, I'm just letting you know what the process is, and then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. Talk about distance, then we're going to talk about labeling, so kind of naming that buzzy bee. Then we're going to do a little bit on understanding, a little bit of empathy, and then we're going to talk about distraction. So this is sort of the process that we are going to go through to turn the volume down on the critic. Thank you, Lucy, for putting in. Claire said, my manager said something really interesting this week, that I shouldn't let myself decide if I can do something, let others. Interesting, Claire. I'm pondering on that perspective. Just because if you don't let yourself decide, then you might become very dependent on other people's opinions. I'm in two minds about that advice. What do we think? So Claire's advice, my manager said something really interesting this week. I shouldn't let myself decide if I can do something. I let others. Yeah, the flip side to that a Helen quote, a quotism, that always helps with me is like, challenge your limits, don't limit your challenges. And sometimes I find that other people use their limits to define mine. Like they kind of go, oh, you won't be able to fit all that in. And I'm like, well, you might not be able to fit it in, but watch me try. So I don't know. Being defined by other people is an interesting thing. But I kind of think, let's help you. Let's help you to know. So let's talk about distancing first of all. So the psychology around this is in these moments when the volume is turned up on our critic, it is likely that there's quite a lot of association being part of that moment. Maybe there's some fear, maybe there's some worry, maybe there's some concern. Like all the, if I look at the comments, what your critic says to you, I'll never get where I want to get to. Am I good enough? If only. There's so much emotion that is in that that moment. And when you look into psychology, it says that emotions can cloud our clarity. So we can lose a bit of perspective on that situation. The emotion becomes overwhelming. It affects our objectivity. So anytime we're sort of overwhelmed and operating without objectivity, it's sort of like a breeding ground for that critic. Really, like, just makes it bigger. We've got no boundaries around it when it's all kind of, the emotions are feeding it. It's like fuel for that critic. So getting a little bit of distance brings the objectivity back. And this is where Rachel comes in. So we talk about on the podcast about talking about yourself in third person. So Helen, you're finding this difficult because, or like asking yourself a question, Helen, why is this particular situation triggering that response? So it's sort of like saying your name and then using a curious question. So Helen and why, or, insert your name here. And this practice, I did not know this. I mean, I knew about the practice of like psychological distancing, and I knew that saying your name can help it, but I didn't know the word. So this is all credit to Rachel Roberts, who's here, and sent me this link on LinkedIn today. And I'm going to put this link for you in chat, because I'm actually prepared. Am I? I have got the link for you. Here is the link of what Rachel sent to me this week. Thank you very much, Rachel. Let me go back to Zoom. Very slick, Helen. Wait, I'll put this in chat for you. This is the chat in case you want to read this article from the BBC. So it's called, how do you think you say this, everyone? Ilism? Ilism? Anyway, it's basically getting a bit of distance from the emotional stuff that you're in by using your name. So Helen, why are you finding this difficult? Helen, what's happening in this situation? Helen, what could you do differently? Helen, when have you coped with this before? Not all of those questions at once, or that'd be a bit overwhelming, but the fact that you're using your name and a curious question, this practice of talking about yourself in the third person, is a really simple brain hack that we can use when we are feeling particularly overwhelmed and concerned about something. That inner critic is starting to grow. It's a way that you can almost put your finger on it in that moment and go, I'm going to stop you growing, and I'm going to kind of start to understand you a little bit. I'm going to start to expose you. So that's the first bit on distancing. Has anyone come across this concept of ilism before? Can anyone come off mute and tell me how to say it so I say it correctly? You're welcome to. Anything else? Okay, someone's special private. So that's the first bit, distance. Second bit is labeling it. So if we can, that question, so you're going to go, Helen, what is going on for you in this moment? So you're going to ask yourself that distancing question. And then what we really want to do is kind of label the fear that's feeding the critic. If we can label it, it's a bit like naming the emotion. This is another technique in psychology. If you can name the emotion, it stops it being so overwhelming. So for example, whichever ones you've put in, when you said, what does my critic sound like? If you were going to label the emotion, what would that emotion be? Is it maybe, let me know in chat. Is it kind of you're worried about being judged? Is it that you've got maybe a fear of failure? Is it, I don't know, what's it like? Is it a need to be liked by other people? Like, what is the fear, do you think, that is feeding your critic? So Jem is saying kind of almost this fear of sort of being stupid. This kind of, what do other people think? Rejection, yeah. I mean, they're big emotions, but I think psychology says become more manageable if we can actually name it. Failure, fear of embarrassment, failing, yeah. People not thinking I'm good, I'm not good enough, I'm not fulfilling my potential. Rima, I have that one as well. I'm like, I've got more to give, and if I don't give it, I'm not doing it. I have that. I mean, it's relentless and exhausting. Careerless. That is an interesting title of a book, Tilly. I can't think what I'd write, but it's an interesting title. I like it. I could do better. Can you tell that Sarah and I in book mode? We're like, we I think we kind of have this like urge to write our third book, but Sarah and I never commit until we've got like that. Like, we know that there's a light bulb moment where we're like, that's the thing. Not being valued. It's a fear of what other people think of me rather than okay. So this labeling the critic's important. Onyeka saying, in Elizabeth Day's podcast, Best Friend Therapy, they named it an actual name, Ingrid, so it's more identifiable. Yeah, that's also a way of like another technique for psychological distance, so that this is not all of me, this is just part of me, this is sort of my Ingrid. And we kind of talked as well, Sarah talked about on the podcast, like labeling it and naming it, like a needy nugget was her one. Like a lot of hers are rooted in neediness, and I'm not being unfair saying that because she said it on the podcast, but needing validation, needing feedback, needing someone to say, yeah, I think this work is good. And so she kind of called it like hers is like the needy nugget. Same kind of thing. If you can understand the emotion and give it a name, so that this is not all of you, it's just this little bit of you, is a useful way of doing it. Sorry to any Ingrids. Sorry to any. I don't know if we've got any Ingrids here. We might have some that watch it back. So sorry, Ingrid. So that's kind of the labeling it part of it. And then the third bit is understanding it. So this is where I think a little bit of empathy comes in. It's also where you may get into a territory of therapy, which we are not therapists, but I just kind of, I had some therapy recently, and I identified with this concept of the inner child. I don't know if any of you have come across this, and you can build on anything that I found about. But effectively, if you were to sort of look into your very lovely brains and see the sort of seed of your inner critic, you might find it in what is called kind of your inner child. So your inner child is the bit of you that's almost like frozen in time from when you were younger. So because of the experiences that you went through as a child, there is a bit of you that's frozen in time. It is attached to the good stuff and it is affected by the bad stuff. And so as an adult, we are very stimulated by that good stuff. We get kind of like, oh, I want more of that. I want more of that. So whatever the good stuff was. And we are also slightly imprinted by the bad stuff. Like it's, for us, we are more sensitive to some of that stuff. So for example, because of my childhood, I am very attached to independence because of some of the things that I had in my child. So my inner child is very, very driven by that. And it creates some good things and it creates some bad things in terms of my how I behave as an adult. And it is useful just to understand, is there anything for you that you experienced in your younger life that could be the seed of what your critic is now saying to you in your adult life? And this is quite deep and it's quite hard. And I would say, if you recognize that, if you can spot a pattern. So I might go, oh, my need for independence sometimes fuels my sort of desire to, I don't know, work alone or independently or whatever's going on for me. If you can see that, then one thing that you can do light touch for yourself, like before you get into the territory of maybe I should talk about this with somebody else, is they say write a letter to your younger self. I appreciate this might not be for everybody, but I'm just, if you want to go into it, this is what they say. Like, we sort of need a bit of empathy. We need to go back to the younger version of ourselves and just sort of address whatever it was and just write a letter of understanding and go, I get you feeling like this. This was a hard thing that you went through. You don't need to carry this with you. Try to go back to that you and empathize with that version of you a little bit, because it is likely that sort of version of you probably wasn't heard at the time. And that's why this critic has grown over time. And some of you might not spot that pattern. You might be, no, Helen, I just had a horrible manager and it's left this legacy with me in my mind. Some of you might spot the pattern. Some of you might go, I can see how that situation when I was younger is affecting what I now say to myself as I'm older. Out of interest, just anonymously, anybody who kind of can see the pattern, anyone who goes, I think there's something that happened when I was younger that affects how I now talk to myself as an adult. If you can see that pattern, could you stick a star for me, like maybe here, maybe in here, so we can just see as a group how many of us identify with maybe something in my youth, childhood, adolescence has contributed to how I'm now feeling as an adult. Like how many of I'm just going to add some manual stars. Okay, so of the amount of us here, how many have we got of us here today? 72. Maybe what, a third of us are saying that we can see that connection. So I think that is also useful to understand. Maybe half, okay, more stars now. Maybe just useful for you to understand. I think also so that you don't beat yourself up so much about this. Like basically, as a result of maybe something that might not have been resolved when you were younger, it's just carried through and you're not alone in that. The reason for me saying this is I think it is hard to unpick your inner gremlin if you don't understand the pattern. So I could say to you like, oh, you know, you don't use your name when you're talking about yourself, and do this in meetings and all that kind of stuff. But effectively, if there's something that happened like 30, 40, how many years ago that has created this, then we probably got to go and pick that stuff if we want to stop the pattern happening. So you can write the letter. That's definitely something that you can do yourself, but it might also be something you want to talk to someone about. Like actually, like therapy could just be, I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about this concept of inner child and how I think it might be affecting me, and they can teach you some stuff that might unpick the pattern. That's all it is. Yeah, it might just be useful because we're getting into some kind of psychology stuff here. The other thing you may or may not want to do, which has struck me recently, is this book. I read this book with all of it's a new book. I think it is out now. I've got one of the published copies. I posted about it on LinkedIn. Actually, it's called Sensitive. And there's a bit in here about empathy, which I really like. Empathy is really important. Only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony can we achieve our true potential. And I think part of this sort of going back to go forward thing, I think, is just making your clever brain work with your human heart, because they might be a little bit out of sync, and just being a bit kind to yourself in the process of doing that could be useful. Yeah, Reg, it is also a great book. I recommend this book. I loved it a lot. I don't think I am a highly sensitive person, but I do know a lot of people that are, and just understanding a little bit about like how the world and work affects highly sensitive people was an insightful read. Before I move on to the last bit, any reflections? I appreciate that is quite we've gone quite deep with the inner child at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. Any reflections on that before we move on to our last bit? Any reflections? I'm just checking. I already have it on order. Great, Nicola. I hope you like it. We'll probably interview the authors on the podcast soon. So anyone who's like, Helen, I do not need another book on my shelf, but I'd quite like to learn more. It's probably coming. I just need to set it up. Okay. All right, well, let's move on to our last area, which is about distraction. So we've kind of had the distancing now. So we're like, hey, Helen, why is this happening? We've had the labeling. It's because it's your needy nugget and it's driven by whatever. And then we've kind of gone, and where has this come from? Like, don't be critical, be kind. What is the root of this issue? Maybe let's try and unpick that and kind of fix that first before we try to get to it. So that's kind of where we've gone to. Last thing, we need to bring a bit of positive energy back in, because we've gone a bit deep with this critic, and we might have reflected on some stuff that feels tough. So we're going to bring a bit of positive energy in so that we're not sort of overwhelmed again by the emotion that this might have created. So this is as literally as simple as spending time doing something that makes you happy, whatever that is, be it gardening, exercising, reading, walking, a project that you're more passionate about, whatever it is, or spending some time with people that you love that have nothing to do with this particular thing, people that build your belief and make you feel better and bring back the perspective. And it might seem like a sticking plaster solution. You're like, well, the critic's still there. But if you can do the first 3 bits, you know, the distancing and the labeling and the understanding, that's the hard stuff. Like, give yourself a break, do some stuff that makes you feel good, because that will then give you the energy to carry on with the cycle. Because this is probably not a one-time thing. And so we need to kind of have the energy to be able to kind of keep going with this. So whatever the thing that energizes you, maybe let's just have just a kind of minute. What would be something that you would do if you did this work, if you were like, I'm going to take that blimmin' inner critic and I'm going to make that voice a lot quieter, what would be the thing that you would do that would give you the energy back, that would like be like, okay, that's a nice break, I feel better for doing ... Outdoor swimming, I love that. Walking in nature, dinner with friends, walking, good music. Tiffany, what you listen to at the moment? I love a reco. I have a music that makes me happy playlist. Maybe I'll share it. Maybe I'll share you the link to my Spotify music that makes me happy. Hiking, Florence and the Machines, always good. Always kind of like a shouter, but can never reach the notes. I can never, in my head, I'm like, I can sing that song. The dog days are over. And then I'm like, no, I'll just be quiet. Gaming, jigsaw. I love a jigsaw, Gemma. I feel like I want to do some jigsaw swapping. Like, you know, once you've done a jigsaw, you've done it. And I'm like, I need some kind of jigsaw swapping. But everyone would have to be very honest that all the pieces were included, because that's the most infuriating thing. You know, like you do a jigsaw and you're like, where is the missing piece? Oh my gosh, everyone, it's the postman. It's the postman. Hello. Sorry, new people. I shouldn't be so keen. don't think he's going to come in. I think he might just pop on the floor. You love the postman. I should bring him in one day, should I? Should I get him in on camera? We do have in jokes now. Sarah must be like, Helen, stop talking about postman. Okay, so a couple of final points, some coach yourself questions for you to reflect on after today. Maybe not to share with me, but maybe you want to just a screenshot. See, I'm waving now. I should find out his name. We'll have a name next time. What would be possible without the presence of your inner critic? So if we could quieten this down to the point where it is I don't know, just a tiny bee, like a little baby bee with an imperceptible buzz, what could you do that you're not doing now? Good thing to reflect on, because it might give you the motivation to put this sort of effort into action. And then who do you trust to talk about your inner critic? I think this is quite hard stuff. And I hopefully have an amazing business partner that I can talk to about it. So who is your Sarah? Who can you talk to about this? Doesn't have to necessarily be someone at work, could be someone outside of work. You could both listen to the podcast together and talk about it. That could be quite a good start place for the conversation. Be like, oh, went on this PodPlus thing, would love you to listen so we can have a chat about it together. That could be a good way to enter this conversation. And then final thing, Podsheet's got it in there. And just wanted to I'm experimenting a little bit. We want to make the impact of PodPlus go further. And we think that could be done. Obviously, there's a helping you, which is the 4-part process I just talked about. There's you if you're a mentor helping other people, and there's you if you're a manager. So we've talked about you quite a lot, the 4 process thing. If you are a mentor, my recommendation would be listen for the critic talking. So if you are a mentor and you're in listen mode, or a coach, you might hear the voice of the critic, and the other person might not be aware of it. So it's well, I just don't feel good at this. And to be honest, they always think I do a bad job, or whatever it is. If you can hear the critic, play it back, because that person might not even realize that that's the voice of their critic, because it's so constant, this critic, that we don't always know it's there. And if you back to the name it's Ingrid. There's Ingrid again. You can talk about it. And if you're a mentor, one way that you could help someone in your team create psychological distance for themselves is, okay, I hear what you're saying. What advice would you give to Jane, Sarah, Michael, whoever it would be? Like, what advice would you give to that person? Just getting them to think about what advice they'd give to someone else is a subtle way of doing the psychological distance thing. So I'm experimenting a little bit with this. I'd quite like to spend a bit more time on PodPlus doing how can we help you and how can you help other people, so you're able to take this stuff more easily to other people. So let me know. You can email me, let me know what you think about that as an approach, because we could split the sessions for PodPlus in the future. How can we help you? How can you help other people? Very, very up for some feedback on that. You can always email me. Email is, and I'll say this is the last thing, helen@amazingif.com. I'll put it in here. Let me know if you think that would be a good change to make for PodPlus. Half of it on you, half of it on helping other people. Let me know. Otherwise, I am going to leave it there for today. Next week, we are going to be talking about turning hard times into helpful learning experiences. So if you know someone who's going through a hard time, or if you are at the moment, that could be useful for you. Looking forward to seeing you all next week, everybody. Have a good week in between, and who knows what the postman might do next. I might go and open that parcel before my next session. Take care, everybody.